There was a wonderful olive harvest in Sicily again that year. Don Lolò had a good acreage of them on his farm Le Quote at Primosole, and foreseeing that the 5 old glazed earthenware jars which he had in the cellar would not be sufficient to contain the new harvest, he'd ordered a 6th one from Santo Stefano di Camastra, where they were made. The jar was as tall as a man's chest, with a big fat belly. Needless to say, Don Lolò had had a row with the jar maker over it. But then who didn't Don Lolò have rows with? Over every trifle, even over a handful of straw. He'd yell at his servants to saddle his mule so that he could rush into town and take out a summons. And so, by sheer dint of using up vast quantities of legal documents, with heavy stamp duty on the lot of them, meeting lawyers' fees, and always having in the end to pay everyone's costs, he'd half ruined himself. This new jar, for which he'd paid 4 lovely, bouncing, chinking once, had been lodged temporarily in the press room, while they were waiting for room to be found for it in the cellar. No one had ever seen such a jar. It really hurt you to see it there, lodged in that cavern stinking with must and that harsh smell which lurks in places that are deprived of light and air. 2 days earlier, the knocking down of the olives had begun. Don Lolò, as usual, was striding about, swearing like a trooper, and making terrible threats if so much as one single olive, got overlooked. And now, at the end of the 3rd day, came calamity. 3 of the peasants, on going into the press room, had been struck with terror at the sight of the magnificent new jar cracked in 2, just as if someone had taken the jar in all its fullness and removed the whole of the front bulge. "Oh, God help us," they cried to one another. "Who's going to tell Don Lolò?" The first of the 3 proposed that they should shut the door and go off quietly as if they knew nothing. The second, however, said, "Are you mad? Try that one on Don Lolò? He's quite capable of believing that we broke it. No, we all stand fast, here, every single one of us." He went out of the press room and, cupping his hands, called, "Don Lolò! Don Lolò!" When Don Lolò came and saw the damage, it was just as if he were going out of his mind. He hurled himself at the 3 men who'd made the discovery. One of them he grabbed by the throat and pinned against the wall, shouting, "By the blood of the Virgin Mary, you'll pay for it." The peasants urged him to calm down. The jar could be mended. After all, only one piece had been broken off. A good jar mender would be able to put it together again like new. There was Sidi Malicasi, for instance, just the man for the job. He'd discovered a miraculous cement, the secret of which he guarded most jealously. It was a cement you couldn't break even with a hammer once it had set. If Don Lolò wished, Sidi Malicasi could come tomorrow morning at crack of dawn, and before you could say 2 twos or 4, the jar would be mended, and better than ever. At first, Don Lolò said no. In the end, however, he let them talk him round. So, next morning at dawn, Sidi Malicasi arrived with his toolkit slung over his shoulder. He was a misshapen old man with swollen, knotty joints like an old olive log. Now, Sidi Malicasi had not yet patented his newly invented cement because he wanted deeds to speak louder than words. So he had to keep a sharp lookout to make sure that no one stole his secret from him. "Show me this cement of yours," Don Lolò said. Sidi Ma shook his head. "You'll see how good it is when the job's done." He put his toolkit on the ground. Then, very, very solemnly, he began his examination of the jar, which by now had been brought out into the threshing yard. Finally, he said, "It'll be all right." Don Lolò started laying down his conditions. "I don't trust it with cement alone. I want rivets as well." "Then I'm off," replied Sidi Ma. Don Lolò grabbed him. "Where are you off to? I've got to use that jar for putting oil in. You don't mean to say you think you can mend that great crack just with cement? I want rivets as well. Cement and rivets." Sidi Ma shook his head. They were all the same. He was always being deprived of the opportunity of doing a good, clean job, carried out according to the rules of his craft. He said, "If that jar doesn't ring like a bell—" "I'm not listening," interrupted Don Lolò.
I'm paying you to use cement and rivets, understand?
And off he went to look after his workmen. Sidima started on his job, bristling with anger and contempt. And his anger and contempt grew with every hole that he drilled in the main body of the jar and in the broken-off bit. This was to make it possible for the steel wire used in the riveting to be threaded through. At last, the first stage of the operation was completed. He flung the drill angrily back into the tool bag and stuck the broken-off piece back into position to see if the holes were the right distance apart. Then he cut off as many pieces of steel wire as he'd need to insert rivets and called over one of the peasants. "Cheer up, Sidima," said the man, seeing Sidima's angry face. Sidima raised his hand in an angry gesture. Then he opened the tin which contained his cement and held it up to heaven as if offering it up to God. Next, with his finger, he began to spread it all along the edge of the broken-off piece and the edge of the jar where it had come away. He took the pieces of wire and, tucking himself inside the open belly of the jar, instructed the peasant to stick the broken-off piece of wire in position. So, one by one, Sidima began to pass the pieces of wire through the holes he'd made in the jar. Then, with his wire cutters, he twisted the ends together. At last, the job was done.
"Here, help me to get out,"
called Sidima to the peasant who had been assisting him. Now, no matter how large in the belly it was, the jar was very tight in the neck, and try as he would, Sidima could not find any way of getting out again. And the peasant, instead of helping him, doubled up with laughter. There was Sidima imprisoned in the jar which he himself had mended, and which now would have to be broken all over again, and broken for good this time. Hearing the laughter and shouting, Don Lolo came up. Sidima, inside the jar, was like a demented tomcat.
"Let me out! Let me out!"
We shall have to settle this legally, said Don Lolo. I must get my lawyer to sort it out for me. Get me my mule. And first of all, you'd better take this. Here, Sidima. I'm paying you for your work. I'm paying you a day's wages, 5 lira. I'm leaving it here for you.
"I don't want anything! I want to get out of here!"
You'll get out, all right. But meanwhile, I'm paying you. Here you are. 5 lira. He took the money out of his waistcoat pocket, threw it into the jar, then leapt into the saddle and rode off to town, gesticulating like a madman. As luck would have it, he didn't have to wait long before the lawyer was free to see him. But when Don Lolo had put the case before him, he did have to wait a long time before the lawyer had finished laughing. "Inside it," he cried. "He's riveted himself up inside it, and what do you think you're entitled to?"
So I'm supposed just to write the whole thing off, am I? Asked Don Lolo.
But don't you know what they'll call this? The lawyer asked. Kidnapping. The lawyer then explained to him that there were 2 sides to the case. On the one hand, he, Don Lolo, had immediately to set the prisoner free in order not to be answerable to a charge of kidnapping. On the other hand, the jar mender was answerable for the harm he'd done the jar.
Ah,
Don Lolo breathed again.
By paying me for the jar,
Yes, said the lawyer, but not as if it were new.
Why not?
Good God, man, because it was broken in the first place.
But it's mended now. It's better than mended. And now if I break it again, I shan't be able to get it mended again. The jar is lost, sir.
The lawyer assured him that that would be taken into account by making him pay whatever the jar was worth in the state in which it was now. So, he advised him, I should get him to give you an estimate of its worth before you go any further. Don Lolo rode back to the farm again. He peered into the jar.
Are you all right in there, Sidima? Absolutely. I'm better off here than in my own home. Glad to hear it. Meanwhile, allow me to inform you that that jar cost me 4 once when it was new. How much do you think it could cost now? With me inside it?
The farmhands laughed. Don Lolo shouted,
Shut up!
Then he called into the jar.
Look, I have 2 propositions. Either your cement's good for nothing or it's good for something. If it's good for nothing, then you're a twister. If it's good for something, then the jar, just as it is now, must have some sort of value. But what value? Give me an estimate.
C. Dimmer reflected. Then he said,
If you'd let me mend it with cement alone as I wanted, I shouldn't be stuck inside, and the jar would have more or less the same value as it had originally. As it is now, with these filthy rivets stuck in it, what value could it possibly have? A third of what it was worth in the first place, at the very most.
A third?
Maybe less, certainly not more.
All right. I'll take your word for it. Now hand over the money.
What?
said C. Dimmer.
Then I'll break the jar and let you out. And you, so my lawyer says, must pay me whatever you think it's worth.
Me pay? I'd sooner stay in here.
Don Lolo was utterly taken aback. The idea that C. Dimmer would no longer wish to quit the jar was something neither he nor the lawyer had foreseen. How was this new difficulty to be resolved? At last he said,
So, you wish to take up permanent residence in my jar. Very well. I'll sue you for trespassing on my property.
Placidly, C. Dimmer replied,
No, signore. You get me out of here, and I'll be off. But I'm not paying you a penny.
You rogue, Don Lolo roared. You can starve to death in there for all I care. We'll see who wins this little battle.
and off he went. For a while, C. Dimmer thought it would be a good idea to have a party with the farmhands, who, having been kept late because of this strange incident, were going to spend the night out in the threshing yard. One of them went off to the inn nearby to buy some wine. There was a moon that night, a moon so bright that it seemed as if day had come. Don Lolo went to bed. But in the middle of the night he was awakened by an infernal din. He went to the window, and by the light of the moon saw what he took to be hordes of devils. They were the drunken farmhands who'd linked hands and who were now dancing round the jar, inside of which C. Dimmer was singing away at the top of his voice. Don Lolo could no longer restrain himself. He ran out and hurled himself at the jar like a mad bull. Before they'd had time to stop him, he'd given it a shove and sent it rolling down the slope. The jar rolled on and on, accompanied by the laughter of the drunks, splitting open against an olive tree. For once, Don Lolo had lost.